The better you get at calisthenics, specifically like the really difficult stuff like one-arm push-ups and pistols, the more you'll learn about strength in general. All the tactics are really reliant on the principles.
Strength is a skill just like anything. It's something that you can learn. Minimalism is attractive to people because they think you don't have to do that much.
You have to have a good enough personal experience, and then I think experience helping other people before you can effectively guide anybody.
Hello and welcome to the Strength Connection podcast. I am your host, Michael Kurkowski. I'm so grateful for you to join me today. In this episode, I am joined by one of my favorite coaches to jam with. Aleks Salkin, aka the Hebrew Hammer, comes back, joins me again on the podcast. I've known Aleks for over 10 years. He's been on the show previously when he spoke about his personal journey of almost quitting the strength coaching world, and I was so pumped to have him back on because he is now the best-selling author of a book that just came out. It's called the No BS Kettlebell and Bodyweight Kickstart program. It's out now and it's the #1 selling men's health book on Amazon. So I was pumped to have him on so we could talk about it. And like every conversation with Aleks, it went deep and it went in many different directions. This was so much fun. I always learn a lot from talking with Aleks, and he has an incredible perspective on strength and his experiences are incredible. All right, so I appreciate you spending some time with me here. I hope you enjoyed this talk. And if you enjoyed this episode, I hope that you can share it with a friend and help spread this message of strength. All right, thank you very much. And now let's get on with the show.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back, or welcome to the show, however you found us. And Aleks, what's up, man? Thank you for coming back.
Thank you for having me back. It's always a pleasure.
It is always a pleasure. Yes. So if you don't know the man on the other side of this microphone, shame on you. Aleks is an incredidible coach. I'm excited to have him back. But dude, you are a best-selling author. Congratulations, my friend.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it still feels kind of surreal to say.
Yeah, no doubt. So, well, to back it up just a little bit really quick, I'm with Aleks Salkin. Aleks has been on the podcast before. I've been on his podcast. We've known each other for quite a bit of time. If you go back to our last episode, Aleks actually went into amazing personal detail of his journey in online coaching when he almost left this space. And it was actually one of my favorite conversations that I've had on here because we really got into the personal side of struggling as a strength coach sometimes and those lights that come out afterwards. So if you haven't listened to that one, you're going to want to go back and do that. But to be in the present right now, the new book, the No BS Kettlebell and Bodyweight Kickstart program, which was #1 on Amazon for men's health, but also podcast, the Hammercast, also is with Pat Flynn on his show quite a bit with Dan John. I love the conversation that you guys have on. So I don't know how you do all this stuff that you're doing, but thank you again for taking some time to jump on this show, man.
Of course. Like I wouldn't miss it for anything. And, like we've talked about, I think in the past, we've known each other now for like 10 years, which almost seems, I don't know, it doesn't even seem possible because It doesn't seem like that much time has passed. But I'm always happy to make time to come on the show. It's one of the best podcasts out there.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate it, man. Yeah. So I want to get into this book. I'm sure we're going to dive into a lot of different, topics as we normally do when we chat. But to start off with this book, essentially, I love it that it encompasses kettlebell training and body weight together. And I think actually you mentioned this in the book. There's not a lot of information out there of how to combine these two together. So that's what I really loved about it. But to even bring it back to what was the inspiration of writing this book? Did you write it with a kind of specific person in mind of who you thought would benefit from this? Or what was kind of the inspiration behind putting this together?
Yeah, definitely. I have to say, when I first started training with kettlebells, I fell in love with the kettlebell like as a completely separate tool. And I think, I look back at, I think it was a line in The Naked Warrior. It's in the Q&A section, and Pavel talks about, so somebody asked like, how do I add kettlebells into my calisthenics training? And he points out that, there are certain Gerovics in the community or kettlebell people who do that very masterfully. And they add, barbells, body weight, kettlebells together. But he said like, until you get to a certain level, you should stick to like one thing or the other. So I think that the kind of general unspoken zeitgeist for a very long time was that these are modalities that you learn individually. So you learn one thing, you get good at that, and then you learn another thing and you get good at that, and so on down the line. And I think it's a very artificial delineation because realistically speaking, like if you break down kettlebell training and bodyweight training for what they ultimately are, and you break away all the details and all the tactics and, flashy stuff, kettlebell training is basically learning how to move an awkward object through free space using strength. And calisthenics training is learning how to move your body through free space using strength. So the two things that are connected here is using strength and using the space that's around you. And so there's no reason, in my opinion, why you can't learn both of them at the same time. Because my experience has been almost everybody that I've trained has seen the value of calisthenics and learns the value of kettlebells. And they're just like this natural combination of the two. And people just seem to be like, you know what, I could probably do both of these at the same time. But there's no resource really talking about them. And then one thing too that I talk about in the book a lot is adding the fifth element, as I like to call it, which is really just the third element in terms of like actual numbers, which would be natural human movements. So specifically the original strength resets. And again, these are oftentimes looked at as things that are treated as completely separate systems. And in their own right, they definitely are, like there's different, again, people get weighed down by the details, but there are different tactics that you have to use for kettlebell training and for calisthenics and for movement training. But there's enough in common where you can combine them. And I just had never seen any book or program or anything like that purport to show somebody how to do that right from the beginning. So the person that I had in mind was, little Alex in 2008, just learning how to lift kettlebells and do some basic bodyweight stuff and wanting to do it all, but not really having any resource that really delved into how to combine them intelligently and in a way that would take you from point A to B to C and then to anywhere else that you wanted to go.
Right. I love that breakdown you said of, kettlebell, really it's moving an odd object through space using strength. And then your bodyweight calisthenics, it's moving your own body through that. That's a beautiful comparison of both of those together. And from the work that, we've both done through RKC and StrongFirst, like those two systems that they do, there is a lot of marriage together. But for a long time, it seemed like, especially when Pavel brought out Naked Warrior and stuff, the message was, no, like focus on this modality first, get really good at this, then go to this one. Now it does seem like the message is, you can combine a lot of these trades together from there, but still it's like, how do you do that? And that's what you really brought up in the programming section of this, which I thought was really great.
Yeah, that's the thing that really trips everybody up is the programming. And I think the important thing about programming, well, one of two things typically happens when you see a lot of kettlebell and bodyweight programs out there, is that the program is either too complicated or it's just way too simple. And I think there needs to be kind of like a balance between the two. And the other thing too, and again, specifically because this is a book oriented more toward, I wouldn't say just beginners, because I have people who are definitely like high intermediates who are doing the program and keeping me posted on how it's going. And, they're very much enjoying it. But for the most part, the idea is to get people who are interested in these things, have dabbled in them, to combine them all together. And the big idea with the programming is to make it so that it's personalized enough so that they can start where they are by doing the movements that they're going to need to do to get really any level of familiarity with all of these systems. But then also, in terms of the programming aspect of it, give them enough leeway to do what they need to do in order to catch up. So for instance, rather than saying like, do 5 sets of 5, I have stuff like you have time. Now I wouldn't say like time sets in the sense that, you've got to be super duper strict, but it's like, here's the amount of time that you have to practice these exercises. Just see how many good sets that you can do, write this down. And the next time you're going to see if you can do a little bit more. If you can, you'll do a little more. And if not, you just stay right where you are. So it gives enough leeway so people are not stressed like, oh God, I'm supposed to have 5 sets of 5 done in 10, 15 minutes. They're more focused on the quality, and it puts them in the right mindset to succeed later on, rather than to focus on making the reps at all costs.
Yeah. I love that. It's kind of that, that difference between it's work constraint versus time constraint. And I think for a while, like everything got so deep in the time constraint stuff, like doing things every 30 seconds or EMOMs, like that was like, that's almost like a word that like just came out in the fitness industry, where what you're saying is like, no, focus on the quality rounds to do of these exercises. And I love that because I think still the message that we need to get across is that strength is a skill, just like anything. It's something that you can learn. And especially it seems like that's with calisthenics and body weight. Like people just think like, oh, body weight exercise is easy. Oh, it's just push-ups or it's just air squats or pistol squats or so. But it's like, no, there's even more skill, it seems, in the calisthenics point about it than even the kettlebell work. And you pointed that out a lot in the program, it seems.
Yeah, you know what? I remember thinking that a number of years ago. I thought, you know what, like the better I get at this bodyweight stuff, the better I'm getting at kettlebell stuff. Now, I don't talk about like one arm push-ups in this book because it's beyond, it's beyond what most people, most of the people in the intended audience are going to be able to do right out of the gate. I do focus on like how to do push-ups correctly so that you can actually build strength rather than just, wear yourself out or, screw up your shoulders, like a lot of the variations that seem to be very popular out there. But yeah, most people seem to think like, what's the big deal? It's either party tricks, like one arm push up, like, it's a party trick, or, front lever party trick. This is the mindset on the one hand where it's like, well, what's the big deal? It's just, they're just body weight exercises. And then on the other hand, there's like this idea that, okay, well, I'm just going to use it to like burn myself out. So it'll be like maybe like a high rep finisher. And again, you have to kind of realize that it's similar with programming, where there are people who are either trying to make it too complicated or too simple. There's somewhere right in the middle where you can kind of meet. But the big issue with calisthenics for sure is that you have to have like a better mind muscle connection. And there's nothing woo woo about it or anything like that, but the better you're able to succeed at calisthenics exercises, the easier everything else seems. Pavel has said the same thing. I brought up Pavel a little bit earlier. Pavel has said that the better you get at calisthenics, specifically like the really difficult stuff like one-arm push-ups and pistols, the more you'll learn about strength in general. And I think that you can take the lessons that you learned from kettlebell training, which in my opinion is definitely a bit easier to learn because it's like an external object. You're not having to think about the processes going on within yourself.
Yes.
And you can start to make translations into, okay, well then how do I do the same thing with calisthenics moves? So you can start doing push-ups or lunges or squats or rows or whatever else and build meaningful strength that will allow you to later on do dips and pull-ups or one-arm push-ups and front levers and things like that. But you have to have a strong enough base to begin with and just some base level understanding of how the body's supposed to move through free space.
Yeah.
Once that happens, a lot of other cool processes get kickstarted.
Yeah. I love it. Then the movements that you bring up in this book, I really loved all of them because they give you that quick external feedback. It seems it's like knowing like this, that's why I always enjoyed kettlebell training and what I've seen it work so well with people. Because when you do it right, you feel that you've done it right. And so you work on the technique piece as well. But what you mentioned there that I want to ask you about is that kind of that sweet spot between too simple and too complicated. It's kind of like in common sense talking about it, like, yes, like there's that famous quote of make things as simple as possible, but not simpler from there. In your experience working with clients and yourself, has there been some determinants or some mechanisms that you found is like, oh, this is the sweet spot between too simple and, all right, I'm making this too complex?
Yeah, definitely. I'm like anybody, and I have a tendency to sometimes overcomplicate things because I've got like a lot of things going on in my head, like, okay, we need to do this, we need to do that, and this, whatever. Ultimately, you should be able to distill what a client needs into as few moving parts as possible. But sometimes it's more than what you might anticipate. So for instance, like, there's a big craze for minimalism that's been, going along in the fitness industry for some time. I'm not a huge fan, particularly because it's normally what they call minimalism is really more what I would call reductionism. It's like, okay, now we've broken it down to like, let's say, as simple as possible, but no simpler. But let's make it simpler anyway. Let's remove even more basic human movement patterns, because that's the way that I look at it. I look at it in terms of like, the big 7 strength movement patterns, and you've got people who try to break it down to only doing like 2 or 3 ad infinitum. And it's not just the kettlebell world. I mean, powerlifting is notorious for this. You know, Mark Rifkin, who's a master SFG, has pointed out that powerlifters will forsake all other movements for the sake of 3. You know, so this is like nothing new, but I think it's the issue is that people who they want to get stronger, fitter, more resilient, healthier. That's the real ultimate goal. And they want to do so through kettlebells or through calisthenics. A lot of times they end up looking for people who can kind of guide them and lead them. And if the guidance is do as little as absolutely possible for as long as possible, I don't think that's a very good goal. I think it's better to say, start off with something that you can commit to and that you can be compliant with. You have to, that's the sweet spot, is commitment and compliance. And then as time goes on and you've got a groove, then you can start to add other things, or you can start to upgrade to more challenging exercises, more challenging weights, things of that nature. But generally speaking, I think that if somebody's just getting started, they can do more movements in their program than a lot of, trainers might otherwise give them. You just have to, it has to be arranged in such a way that they're not going to be overwhelmed. So you're not going to have them do like 10 or 15 movements in a single session. But, over the course of like a week, you can, and if they're going to have multiple sessions in a week, you can almost certainly get them doing more than just 2 to 3 moves, until they're just bored to tears. So that's where the most important breakthroughs happen, I think, is when people learn how to be consistent so that they can actually see some measurable improvement in specific, goals, and compliance, meaning they're not going to be so bored to tears by the stuff they're being consistent with, that they're going to be like, okay, well, maybe now I'm going to try to add, all these different flashy movements. So generally speaking, it's going to need to be more than just like 1 or 2 things that you have them do.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. The concept of minimalism has piqued my curiosity over the last year. And I love that you said it. I know. Well, just the concept of it, because it's like the term total body movement. Like, I really don't love that term. I'm still trying to find a better one to actually do from that. But what you said is like, most people view minimalism as more reductionism. And I think it's kind of along that line of, I think maybe minimalism is attractive to people because they think you don't have to do that much. It means it doesn't have to be challenging. It doesn't have to be hard, when in reality, you can do one exercise. I mean, powerlifters, you could say sometimes they get into that one trick pony type stuff, but they're pushing really hard. If they're making those things challenging. That's why they're building strength on that. Is that what most people need? Probably not. But do you think that maybe people misconstrue that term minimalism because they think that, I don't have to do that much in order to get the goals that I want to achieve?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think the other part is that there's not like a really great definition for it, because if you ask, I actually did ask this once. I went to the StrongFirst page on Facebook and I asked, what's your definition of minimalism? And it's like, I got dozens of responses and almost none of them were repeats. It was all just, very.
How can I stick out in the crowd?
Yeah, exactly. But it was like, okay, so people are coming at this with, by looking at it through their own eyes. They don't have like a specific definition in mind. And I don't think there is some standardized definition. I think it's really more, I like my friend Pat Flynn's definition, which is the ability to be effective and efficient. And, Pat, his approach to minimalism, I call it Flynnimalism. I don't call it minimalism. But his approach to minimalism actually is a good one. I think it's better than what most people use, because it's not minimalism in terms of exercise selection. It's minimalism in terms of trying to find, like, figuring out what your goal is, what equipment you have, how much time you have, whether or not you can recover, what skills and then figuring out what is going to be the right course of action. So it's not pre-assuming that just a few exercises can solve all your problems, right?
Right.
That's a big difference. I think, again, Geoff Neupert has, I think, a similar approach in terms of minimalism, because we had a chat about it on my podcast some time ago. And because I had posted something on Instagram kind of poking fun at minimalism. And so we got a chat going via email. And I was like, why don't you just come on the podcast? We'll talk about it. So he and I have a agreement, I would say, on the philosophy in terms of figuring out what you should put in your training, what you shouldn't, understanding that there is a very important personalization or individualization element to it. And it's not really oriented specifically around exercises, but really more, like getting the most amount of meaningful work done in the least amount of time. And
Right.
that's different. I think that's like an acceptable approach to minimalism. But like I said, I think most often what passes as minimalism is like what you said. It's like people want like the minimal effective dose, which is like going to give you the minimal effective, result.
Exactly.
Well, people don't. Now there's a reason to know what the minimal effective dose is, because when the fit hits the shan, let's say,
Right.
and you've got a lot of stuff on your plate, you don't have a lot of time to train. It's important to know, okay, well, how much can I do and still make meaningful progress? So the difference would be like driving on the highway at 65 miles an hour versus driving through a neighborhood at 25. You're still moving forward, but if you're committing yourself only to drive 25 miles an hour because you're committed only to the minimum effective dose and you think that it's somehow better, it's just going to take you longer to get to your destination. So that's the biggest issue that I see, is that people, rather than looking for, and I wouldn't even say, you can look at it as like minimal, maximal, which is like, redlining it, which is also a bad idea, which everybody agrees on. And then optimal, which is to some degree, it's kind of like an idealized look at like, okay, in optimal situations, what can I, what would I aim for? But I would say like optimal for what you have available to time, skill, recovery capacity, et cetera. That is what most people should be aiming for, because again, maximal, redlining it, you can do that every once in a while. Minimal, we've already discussed why that's
right.
Great. Optimal, which would be like, again, the planets are aligned, kids are at summer camp.
Yeah.
Boss is
8
like,
hours,
hey,
8 hours sleep. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Versus optimal for your circumstances, which might be a little bit below regular optimal. That's probably going to be the sweet spot for most people. And again, it just comes back to moderate training that you can do repeatedly so that you can be compliant and consistent.
Yeah, it's I remember talking with Geoff Neupert. One of the times I had him on the podcast, I was in the middle of doing the Wolf program from his Even More Kettlebell Muscle, which is pretty much all legs. It's all front squats. And even Geoff was just like, why would you do that?
I thought that was a joke. I didn't think anyone was going to do that.
Exactly. And he's like, and we kind of got into that discussion of it. And I think that's an important thing to talk about minimalism is sometimes it's like, if all you have is just this amount of equipment or this amount of time, maximizing that time is important. You can get a lot done with it. I think that's where Geoff, got into, such infamy in his world of kettlebell complexes, is because in 15 minutes of work a week, you can get a lot of work done. Yeah. However, if you have more time, if you have other things available for you, you don't have to just do that. You can actually spread it out, and that might be more optimal. And that's when I remember when Coach Dan was on my podcast, was right after you posted that on StrongFirst about minimalism. And I asked him about that. And the word he used is when you have restraints. It's like if you were on a desert island and you only had one tool, it's like, how can you still get stronger with just that one tool? Now, all of a sudden, we're expanding our mindset. We're expanding the movements that we can do. And it's like, that's where kind of the concept of minimalism, I think, gets lost in that.
Big time. Yeah, I think that's very reasonable, because everybody does have constraints. I mean, my book was written with that in mind. So you'll be able to do it if all you have is a kettlebell, some gymnastics rings, and then maybe some space on the floor. So in a sense, it's a very minimalist program. But I would say the intent was not, to do it out of like some sense of allegiance toward minimalism, but like realism. Because most people, when they're like, oh, I want to start kettlebell training, they're not going to be like, time to rush out and get an entire rack of kettlebells from 8 kilos to 48 kilos.
Nope.
So,
one bell.
Yeah, exactly. They're only gonna have so much equipment available. And those constraints, learning how to be successful with those constraints is valuable. But artificially constraining yourself doesn't make any sense. It's like Pavel. I keep bringing up Pavel. I always love his stories and his insights in it, whatever. And he said there was a great joke. He said the Russian jokes, he said, often work better in Russian, but a lot of times they're still very funny in English. And he said there's one that Russians are known for, what was it? Russians are known for creating their own problems and then heroically overcoming them. And I think that like artificially constraining yourself is like that. It's like, okay, I have other kettlebells, I have gymnastics rings, I have, space on the floor, but I'm going to limit myself to only doing one kettlebell exercise. Well, unless you or exercises with one kettlebell, unless, you have a good reason to do that. I think you're constraining yourself like that is not really doing yourself that many favors. It's good to know what to do in those circumstances. Absolutely. Because those exist, but doing it on purpose, I don't think is the wisest idea. And that seems to be like a recurring theme now in the kettlebell world. And I'm not a huge fan.
Yeah. It's like, I'm going to run this marathon, but I'm going to put this huge rock in my shoe.
Yes,
and to see if I can overcome that from there.
Or I'm going to, yeah, exactly. Or I'm going to drink a bunch of X-Lax and I'm going to see how far I can get before
absolutely
I got to take
heroically overcome. Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
So when you were putting the programs together for this, I know you kept it, relatively minimal in the exercises that you do from there. When you put those together, did that come from, I'm sure, a lot of your own experience of doing it? Did you put together kind of some client trials to see what was the best ones to combine together? How did you go about putting together the programming for it?
My experience with training clients and getting insights from their own, what has worked for them, what has not worked for them, was definitely a big part of it. And so that influenced to some degree, it influenced the exercise selection. So for instance, one of the things that, even though this is a Kickstart program for kettlebells and bodyweight training, there's no Turkish getup in it. And a lot of times people are like, how dare you not put in a Turkish getup? I instead use a military press. And a lot of people would say, well, that's really more like an intermediate move. It's the exact reverse. They're like, just to give you an example, and this comes directly from experience with starting people off from zero. In fact, I'll give you some stories to explain why, so that I don't have to work backward. The audience can understand right from the outset. A number of years ago, I was living in Pennsylvania and I was teaching at the world famous Dragon Gym in Exton, Pennsylvania, which is run by a Taekwondo master and all around hardcore dude named Sam Sinister, as well as a couple of his other business partners. And they had a kettlebell program. And I was working with students from either within the gym or outside the gym who were interested in doing kettlebell training, but most of them had no experience. And Sam had a system that he had put together. And Sam was also a kettlebell instructor, so with StrongFirst, so he's intimately familiar with all of this stuff. And he said, what you're going to teach them is the swing, the goblet squat, and the military press. And I remember thinking to myself, why not the get up? That's really fundamental. That's kind of like swing, get up, and goblet squat. That's like the Swoley Trinity of kettlebell training. And, but I was like, okay, I'll do that. And I realized that it was a very smart choice of selection because number one, obviously squats, I think, are relatively simple to teach for the most part. There's not a ton of technique that goes into them. Military press, likewise, it's like, you got to do if you're pretty good, you can just kind of get people pressing pretty quickly, or you can realize that their shoulder mobility is no bueno and they're going to need to work on that first. And then, the swing, typically, it's just very different from what most people are used to. So that takes a little bit longer for people to get used to. So, but I would only have maybe 20 to 30 minutes to teach them all these things. And the goal was not to make them masters, but to get them to do them safely so that they could participate in a class. And because that's what we wanted to do. And then the instructor's job was to say, okay, now I know it on the board, it says do X, Y, and Z, but what you're going to do is what we practiced in the class beforehand, and you're going to do X, Y, and Z instead. And I came to realize that, as much as I love the Turkish getup, it's not the best thing to teach a complete beginner, because if you look at it from their perspective, it's okay. Well, first of all, look at it from just a complete outsider's perspective, like third person perspective. Military press has basically two movements. It's on the chest, over your head, right? And then of course there's a negative portion, but that's just a reversal. It has to start here and here. That's two things, okay? Turkish getup is like 7 movements on the way up and then 7 on the way down. So it's like, which is going to be a little bit more fundamental and which is going to take a little bit more skill to learn. The other thing you have to keep in mind with the getup too is that there are other skills within the Getup that if you're not very good at, the Getup is just going to confound you nonstop. Like one of those things, and this is a movement that appears in the No BS book that I wrote, is segmental rolling from the original strength resets. It's in there for a reason, because eventually you are going to want to do Turkish Getups, and you're going to need to learn how to roll. And I kid you not, most of the people, probably 80% of the people that I have coached online and in person, have a difficult time segmentally rolling, because
really,
oh yeah, big time. Because essentially what it is you'd think, oh, okay, well, it's just rolling. What's the big deal? But how much do we really have to twist our spine in general? Yes. What do people normally do when they're getting up off the ground? A lot of people are used to trying to sit up.
Right.
They might do some kind of rolling over, but they're going to try to use their entire body. And the idea behind segmental rolling is to really kind of emphasize this, obviously the rotational aspect of it, specifically from the upper body, but doing so by using your head and your arm to kind of drive.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are just not accustomed to doing that at all. It's not advanced. It's very foundational. But if you can't do that, you're definitely not going to do it while balancing a weight over your head.
Yes.
So, and then likewise, if you can't do rows, posting up to the elbow is going to be kind of tough, because ultimately what it is, it's kind of like a static row in a way. Same thing with lunge. If you can't lunge, you're going to be in a real pickle by the time you get to, the lunge position where you have to stand up. And I've seen it happen before, just even without weight, walking people through it. Like at that part, they might have to put their hand on their knee. They might lean forward to such a degree that if there were a weight in their hand, it would fall. So again, a lot of instructors are thinking like, they're thinking like fishermen instead of like fish in terms of what exercise selections they should be using.
Yes.
So the big thing that I wanted to focus on was the stuff that was going to, number one, we'll honor the nature of the kettlebell and bodyweight movements, like what the most fundamental skills are going to be in order to succeed at them later on.
Mm-hmm.
So for in the military, kettlebell training, I think anything overhead and anything ballistic, these are like fundamental elements of kettlebell training. This is why swings and get-ups, like this prescription carries so much weight, because it's in many ways the essence of kettlebell training, putting something overhead and doing a ballistic lower body drill. And then with calisthenics, it is, again, moving your body against free space in a variety of ways. So learning how to get good at the push-up, even though everybody's done them, most of them have been, have left
awful.
Something to be desired. Yeah, exactly, in terms of their technique.
Mm-hmm.
You're a lot more brutal than I am, see, because I was like left something to be desired, and you're like awful. No. The word economy
when the U.S. military changed how push-ups are actually counted, it's like that things are going a little bit downhill in the calisthenics department.
Well, I would say, a lot of the military standards are indicative of a general societal decline, unfortunately. But that's a whole different, discussion for a different day. But you're right. I mean, a lot of the technique that people use in calisthenics is generally not very good, because the approach is similar. I don't know if you've ever seen The Mask of Zorro with Anthony Hopkins and Antonio Banderas.
Oh, yeah.
Anthony Hopkins, for those who haven't seen it, he plays like the original Zorro, and he's now kind of like a hermit or whatever. And then Don Diego de la Vega is going to be the new Zorro, and that's played by Antonio Banderas. Mm-hmm. And so he's going to train him in the art of sword fighting. And, he's whipping the sword around, and Hopkins is like, have you ever used a sword before? He said, like, do you know what you're doing? And he said, yeah, pointy end goes in the other man. It's like, that's the point, but like, what's the strategy that's going to allow you to be successful? And so that's missing in most calisthenics. I think in the kettlebell world, particularly in the StrongFirst world, people are pretty good. The instructors are very good about teaching proper technique. But again, calisthenics, like you pointed out, there's like a whole different set of skills, even though there's some interrelated ones. There's a whole different set of skills that often just confounds people. And so the big idea is trying to pick the right movements that'll allow people to be successful, so that I'm not having them do, like, for instance, I love pull-ups. It's one of my favorite moves of all time. They also don't appear in the book, because I'm operating under the assumption that people who are starting may not yet have the strength to do that. So if I put in do a bunch of pull-ups, some people may not even be able to hang the bar for 30 seconds.
That's why the row is such a better movement for the gymnastics or TRX or something like that to use. Mm-hmm.
And it's better for people's shoulders, by the way, because again, as much as I love pull-ups, rows are one of the few like foundational upper body movements that allow you to keep your shoulders neutral rather than requiring a good degree of internal rotation at the finish of the movement. Now, internal rotation of the shoulder is not bad, so that's not what I'm saying. But we get enough of it from sitting around all day and being hunched over, and then you add more and more of that with the other movements that you're doing. It's nice to have something in there that kind of just naturally brings your shoulders back, puts them in a neutral position, and is not adding more of more of a surplus of something that your body already has. So the exercise selection, if you're an instructor or you're relatively intermediate, might seem it's not going to seem completely off the wall, because I didn't throw anything in that's like just completely crazy. It's all, but the rationale behind all of it absolutely comes from the work that I've done with people over the years, what I've realized people need more of or less of, and where people should start versus where they should aim to go. Meaning, in the kettlebell world, for instance, I think starting with a military press makes more sense, and then going to the Turkish getup rather than the reverse, because you will drastically shorten the gap in start to finish, or the learning curve, we might call it, if you learn how to do military presses first, and then rows and lunges and other things like that, and then you go on and you say, okay, well, now I'm going to try the Turkish getup. You've already got some of these skills subconsciously embedded in you. It's just going to be a lot easier for you to be successful and have a lot fewer sessions of wailing and gnashing of teeth.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. There's a couple threads I want to pull on that, which is it's the first time I realized how powerful just doing a push-up properly was Pavel's work with strong endurance. One of the protocols is just swings and push-ups. And this was like that quizzical movement of these two combined together. That was like, we used to do it in the old studio that we had, and people were just like, I don't know, I just feel really good afterwards. It's like, yeah, I know, don't need to think any more of it. But he would have us start at the bottom position of the push-up to kind of get that bottom in corkscrew the shoulders, which I was like, okay, like there's just little tweaks that you can do in these things to build the skill up. But I'm glad you brought up the stuff with the get up. And it's so cool that, Sam did that so long ago, because that time the get up was king. Like if you said anything wrong, like off about the get up, it's blasphemy.
Well, you know what? It's funny you should say this, because, and I'm not going to name any names or implicate any people, but I had somebody write me a very testy email. I had other people write me emails that were very respectful about this topic, but I wrote an email because I have a daily email that I send out to people on my list, and I think it was titled "Why the Getup-Ain't-All-That." And right in the first paragraph, I told people, yes, exactly. There was steam coming out of people's ears. Right from the beginning, I said, I'm a big fan of Getup. And I've done Getups with the beast. Okay. So it's not like I suck at them and, I'm just talking trash. Like I've spent a lot of time working on the Getup. It's a mighty fine movement. I do like it. But the thing is, I don't ascribe magical powers to it. I think that it has a proper context within people's training. And there's a time and a place for it. And the time is not always, and the place is not everywhere, So basically, in the email, I just explained my rationale. And this guy who had the letters MD at the end of his name, so he's not, a dumb guy. He's just very ideological about his love of Getup. He was like, you said this, that, and the other thing, and now you're talking trash about the Getup. I'm unsubscribing. And I thought it was so funny, I had to write an email about it the very next day. Unfortunately, he was off my list by this point, so he couldn't, see my very, very funny response. But yeah, people get really, really offended by it. And I find it, I do understand it, because I was at, like I said, when Sam brought this up, I wasn't indignant, but I was definitely like, that just seems like a very strange choice, because it doesn't, it just kind of broke the paradigm that I had in my head. But it turns out that he was very right. And, when you've got, when you're faced with the fact that maybe there's a better way to do things, the smart thing to do is to at least test it out and see if it's all that it seems. And I definitely think that the Getup is something every kettlebell trainee should learn, but if they're just getting started, that wouldn't be the first thing I would teach them.
Yeah. And then the question that, I popped in my head a little while ago. It's just, okay, how heavy do you need to go with get-ups and for it to still benefit you building progress in your strength over and over again? This was, me and Chris, my former partner, we had conversations about this quite a bit because when we were in the studio, like we had a get-up wall, like you put your initials next to how heavy you did your get-ups. So we were training people how to think of what strength is just from that wall. And we said, if we had to go back and do it again, we would have trained the military press for people a lot earlier, because that movement, and that's the great thing about kettlebell training, is just the movement of the architecture of the kettlebell with your shoulder is so good for building that latch shelf, for kind of getting everything set up over there. But it's, like when you think about it in common sense, if somebody's never exercised or worked out before, and you're going to have them do a move where there's like 13 or 14 movements in one thing right off the bat, like first, not only there's a lot of opportunity that it might go off the rails at some point, but two, getting inside that person's mind of like going from the ground up to their feet could be one of the most, I hate the word traumatizing, but a really nerve-wracking thing for them to do at one time. So like absolutely, again, huge fan of it. I've done plenty of work with that before, but how heavy you need to go to actually have it benefit your strength, I think is still a big question we need to ask ourselves. Yeah,
I actually think another good question to ask is how much stronger is it even going to make you? I think that there are, and I'll tell you why I say this too, because now that people are already offended and are just listening now out of like just pure hate, we might as well just keep going.
What are they going to say next?
Well, the question is, are they going to show up at my front door? I got to be very careful. I've noticed this too, is that, and this is not to talk down about Simple and Sinister, because I've done it. I think it's a good program, but I think every program, including mine, by the way, like and I'm not saying that people have to go out and buy this book, but if you do, the program in it is only 2 weeks long because it's supposed to be a Kickstart. So the idea is that it's like, again, it's going to make it easy to be consistent, easy to be compliant, and so on. And you can repeat it. It's like I point out in there that, you can repeat it as many times as you want until you want to move on. But the thing you have to keep in mind with every program is that it has a shelf life. So realistically speaking, you're going to get to the point where you've just kind of maxed out the adaptations you can expect to get, and the adaptations will start to slow down. This is just the case for everything. My programs, everyone's programs. So the other thing to keep in mind is that because the get-up is like, it's a static movement, I think the fastest way to improve it is to do dynamic movements. So for instance, your shoulder does move through like a bunch of, to some degree, we can say like a certain range of motion, obviously because it's going all over the place, but your arm is still locked out. And so the movements of the shoulder it's not going from like one place to the next. So in some ways it's like more repositioning than it is like dynamic strength.
Right. Yep.
But I would hazard a guess that probably 90% of the people who have successfully completed Simple and Sinister, the Sinister one with 48 kilos the whole way, I would bet, and I'm not basing this on anything other than, like I said, hazarding a guess, I would bet most of them have either pressed the beast or have come pretty close to pressing it prior to doing it. So they're not people who, like, for instance, I've known people who can do very heavy get-up, but would struggle to press even like half that weight. Like when I did my beast press, not beast press, I wish I had done the beast. I've not really put that much focus on it, but when I did my beast get up a number of years ago, my best press at that point, I think, was 36 kilos.
Yeah.
So it was significantly lower than and almost all of my get up practice was done with 32 kilos. Periodically I would do like 40 kilos, but it was generally 32 or below. So that was number one, that was enough to build up to the beast get up, at least for one rep on one side. So in terms of how heavy you really need to go, well, that should show you that, again, a lot of it's going to be a matter of practice and, putting in the time. But then the other thing is that I see this not infrequently, people writing on forums talking about having done, get-ups for almost to the exclusion of every other upper body movement for like a year, and only added maybe 4 kilos to their get-up, going from like 20 kilos to 24. So I think people in this instance would be better served by doing it in, let's say, if they're going to do, let's say, Simple and Sinister. And again, far be it from me to tell people how to do Pavel's program. That's really more, up to Pavel to tell people. But my instinct would be that you should probably do most programs for maybe 6 weeks, unless they're written specifically to be like, 8 or 12 or whatever. And then after that, you move on to something that is, if you really want to continue to get good at it, let's say get-ups are one of the things, then you start focusing on other things that are going to make your get-up better in the next program. And it doesn't have to be, stuff as simple as just strengthening your back with rows and pull-ups. Big help for making sure that your back is strong enough and that you can create, like you pointed out, that lat shelf, while you're doing it. Dynamic movements for the shoulders, which is as simple as military pressing, push-ups, dips, things like that. And some lower body stuff, obviously, like swings are still going to be good for that, but also lunges. I know that lunges get a bad rap and people think, you can't move much weight with them, so they're not that good. Believe me, you want both legs to be pretty evenly developed. And it's a pretty decent way to build that skill. And then after that, you go back for another 6 weeks and you have at it again. To me, this seems like a much better approach, but it seems like it's blasphemy to suggest it. And call me a blasphemer, but I'm going to suggest it anyway.
I'm right there with you. I'll partner up in the blasphemy. No, it is because personally, like I was training for Sinister for a while, and I was close right when about the lockout was down, and then just the energy of doing so many heavy get-ups like that was so taxing on my body. And to be honest, like the interesting thing about heavy get-ups like that, of doing it, especially with something like the 48. The weight on my wrist was just absolutely destroying my hand, where it almost got into a painful position where it was like, just by keeping that much weight on your arm for so long, I don't know how that just totally impacts the static strength and the ability. Elbows were sore. I mean, a lot of stuff came up from just doing that much weight. So again, I think the movement of it is so great. And I've talked with Bret quite a bit about this, because they have one of the first books I ever read was Calisthenics, which when him and Gray were doing the breakdown of the getup, and he still even says, it's like, that book's old. Like you got to progress and keep, just bringing up new thoughts of stuff too. But I think when I saw like the military press was in there in your book, I was like, yes, I'm like, this is perfect, because I don't know, like for me, I was always for a while that person that thought like you have to do swings and get-ups for a long time in order to master kettlebells. Like, we can't snatch yet. No, you got to keep doing this for a while. It's like, no, you can teach somebody to snatch relatively quickly. You can teach somebody to press something overhead, teach them how to keep their body tight from it. We can do probably a lot more, and it's actually going to benefit them a lot faster. So I think if I went back and talked to myself as a young coach, I would have said, let people progress a little bit faster than what you think they need to do. You don't need to wrap them in duct tape or bubble wrap right off the bat.
Yeah, I think I would have done something similar. I was a little bit less dogmatic, I think, but I still kind of went by the book for in a lot of those things. One of the really important things that any coach has to learn is the difference between principles, strategies, and tactics. And people who are, let's say, enthusiasts for kettlebell and calisthenics training, and even coaches too. So it's not just the layman, we might say, I have a tendency to really focus in on tactics, because it's the thing that you can see most close up. And there are many, many tactics that you can use for a wide variety of purposes, but they can really only be effectively selected if you know what your goal is and a variety of other individual information. And then again, then there's also strategies. So that might look at that as like programming. So how are we going to organize these various different tactics in a way that is going to be beneficial toward your goal? And then there are overarching principles. And, when you start to zoom out in the principles, what you see is stuff that is going to appear in all of the strategies and all of the tactics that are going to be relevant toward any goal using whatever methodology you're using. So like I pointed out, there are commonalities between kettlebell training and calisthenics. And this is a part of the principles section. We might also look at other principles as like practice, don't work out. Train to improve your skill, and your strength will be there. You'll be safer. Another one, continuity of the training process. Another thing we teach about in StrongFirst. Specialized variety. There are a few others that I would put in there, but the big thing that any good coach is going to have to learn how to do is choose the tactics based off of, well, first of all, choose the strategies and the tactics based off of the principles, and to understand that getting too bogged down in what the tactics are, like the exact set and rep scheme, because this is another thing where I think people get needlessly caught up with, is like, oh, well, anything over 5 reps is pointless. And I have, and it's not just my experience, this is the experience of probably millions of other people, that there are other great rep ranges beyond 3 to 5 reps that are going to go a long way to help you get stronger, look better, perform better, and that sort of a thing. So the only way that you're going to end up getting bogged down with those tactics is if we refuse to look at how the principle is going to be applied to a variety of things, and then choose what's going to be the right thing to do for your individual student, for your group classes, for the people that you're training online. All the tactics are really reliant on the principles first and foremost. So that is often overlooked, I think, even by otherwise very good coaches.
That's a really good point. I haven't really thought of it that way, of really, you should be separating the strategies and tactics. A lot of times we just put those things together. It's like we understand principles, and principles, foundation, it's those jargon words that they sound really good. A lot of times we don't actually know exactly what those mean. It's like, you need to get get the definitions down in that. But I like what you said there, like the tactics, you can adjust those based on the strategy from there. And I think, going back and thinking of all the stuff that I've messed up over time, that's got me here to, some success as a coach, which is good, but it's like, you have to sometimes go through those things as well in order to learn.
Yeah. Before you can be old and wise, you have to first be young and stupid.
Yes. And then recognize that. I just heard this, I forget what the theory's called, but it's like, when you first get into something that you don't know anything about, that's when you believe you don't know anything. But then if you study for about 6 months to a year, that's when your confidence of thinking you know everything is at its peak. And then the more and more you learn afterward, it's called the Dunbar something. I forget what.
Oh, Dunbar-Kruger effect. Yeah.
Is that what it is? Yeah. It's and then after that you realize, wow, I don't know anything.
Dunning-Kruger.
I think it's Dunning something, I think. Yeah. I think you're on point. Yeah. But it is as soon as you're into it a little bit, you're like, oh shit, I know everything that's going on here, and then all of a sudden you keep going. You're like, wow, I don't know anything.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is that social media makes it so much worse, because now everybody's got a bullhorn that they can just, blast their opinions out. I try to be very careful about that, just because I realize even when Dunning-Kruger is in full effect in me, I try to do my best to have the presence of mind to be like, okay, you know what? Some of the things that I would ask some of my opponents, what books have you read on the topic? Or how do you know that? If I can't come up with a good enough example, I'm like, okay, maybe this is just my own biases, playing in. And so I try to be a little bit more careful about that. But
I like talking to people like you because I've known you for a long time, and I love to be able to promote your stuff that you put out, because also I know that you've gone through it yourself. It's so many times now in social media, if you have a good physique out there, you could be selling a bunch of stuff just based on the optics of what you look. You might have never trained anybody in your life. There's a million business coaches out there that have never built a business up. So it's if you've actually gone through it yourself and actually, felt the impacts of what you're putting down on paper, okay, now there's some relevance to it.
Yeah, it's still, I had a friend of mine in Europe he's actually a very successful business owner. He has several gyms in a Central European country. And he reached out and he's like, I wanted to see if I could maybe pick your brain about running an online business, because I've run an online business for a number of years now. And I was like, sure, I'd be happy to help out. But in my head, I'm like, God, I got to really think about what am I going to tell them? Because I've never coached anybody through it. It's one of those things. It's I know that first of all, I know that I can do it. I also know that there are a lot of things that I don't know enough of, or I don't have a deep enough knowledge of, that to translate it into the strategies and tactics that he can use by having a wide enough and deep enough understanding of the principles is something that I know I'll be able to help him on. I'll be able to guide him in the right track, because he understands enough of the principles of running a business as well. But I definitely agreed And I'm thinking, maybe one day I would be happy to like teach people this like for money. But for now, I feel like I just don't know enough to like, I would potentially be doing people a disservice because there are things that, I just didn't even think about. And, they go and they're like, yeah, okay, it didn't work all that well or whatever. And it's because I forgot, it's like the joke in math, like, oh, you forgot to carry the 1 and now everything's screwed up. It happens with everything. So you have to have a good enough personal experience. And then I think experience helping other people before you can effectively guide anybody. That's 100% in anything.
Yeah. Because it's not as much even like what strategies and tactics you put into place, but knowing like when those failures, when those emotional struggles are popping up, when you feel like you can't do it anymore, and just having some continuity with that person. I mean, I think that's really the biggest part of coaching. It's really how you communicate with people on that. All the tactics and strategies, like it's fantastic. And there's better ways to do things. There's better programs that you can follow, but still like to go through, like, I'm so, curious for this book I know it's going to help the beginners, but then also I love that it works towards the advanced intermediates as well. Cause I think that's the demographic of people that we forget about a lot of times, the people that are doing a lot of good stuff, but they need to continuously progress, continuously advance in their work. So I think it's all great.
Yeah. I think like for me, I remember, for instance, a number of years ago, I was doing Muay Thai. And it was interesting because basically what they had was beginners classes and then like team training. So there wasn't really like, oh, if you come Wednesday nights, we're going to do some more advanced stuff, or Friday nights we'll do sparring. And it's probably very different now. This was, many, many years ago. And a friend of mine pointed that out. And I was a beginner, so I really didn't care. It was like, I don't know what I'm doing anyway. Like I need these beginner classes. But then at some point I did get invited to join team training. Mm-hmm. And it was definitely like being tossed into the lion's den. I mean, I think I held my own pretty well, but I definitely got like kicked in the head a lot and like knocked down and, and all that other stuff. So, like having, you don't want that to be the case with somebody who's just training recreationally. If you're young and you have low mileage on your body, let's say, you can withstand a bit more,
right?
But you owe it to the people who are paying you money to get them better, to not be like, okay, here's beginner stuff. Now we're going to learn the snatch test. And it's like, well, can they do one snatch? How do they handle themselves under pressure, under fatigue? Mm-hmm. These are not small considerations. So yeah, you have to have the experience to understand the things that you can't learn from a manual. And that only comes from being in the trenches.
Just experience, no doubt. Brother, you're awesome. Thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate it. And I'm so happy for you with this book. I think it's awesome and really appreciate the time, man.
Thank you kindly.
Absolutely. If people want to check out the book, grab it, Amazon, best place?
Yeah, if they want to, they can go to Amazon. It's called the No BS Kettlebell and Bodyweight Kickstart program. As you'll see, it does not look like any other book in the sphere of really physical training at all. I did not want it to look like, some I take myself too seriously kind of book with like, gruff face and like shirtless, whatever. So I had an artist that I know in Italy whip up the cover. And if anybody wants similar cover art done, you can reach out to me and I'll put you in touch with them. Mm-hmm. But then the other thing too is that, if people want to learn a little bit more about me and what I do in particular before they go out and, buy anything, go to 9minutechallenge.com. Mm-hmm. And you can get my 9-minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge. It is, as the name implies, 9 minutes long, and it contains both kettlebell and bodyweight movements. The main focus of it is learning how to use, you talked about full body and not really liking the term. This is, I think, would be as close as it gets to, full body training is the stuff that I do in there, because it's more gait pattern oriented movements, but through the lens of strength. So stuff like crawling, loaded carries, stuff that has a very, very short learning curve. You can very easily add it to whatever you're doing. You can add it to the No BS program as well. You can add it to really any program. It's designed to kind of fill a huge gap that I've noticed that almost everybody has, which is very little focus on improving the strength of their gait pattern. And it's free. So you just go to 9minutechallenge.com. It's the number 9minutechallenge.com, and it's yours.
Love it. Thank you, brother. Everyone, you heard it here. 9-minute challenge, No BS kettlebell bodyweight program. Go grab it. I'll catch you on the next one.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found some great value here. And if you like this episode, please drop a comment and leave us a 5-star rating and review. It does more to build the show than you can imagine. And do not forget to check out and join the Strength Connection Facebook group. In this group, I share the biggest takeaways and lessons from these amazing conversations, as well as training and strength tips for pursuing mastery and fulfillment in life. This group is filled with individuals looking to take full control over their strength, and it's the perfect space to explore new ideas and to share your journey. And you'll also get exclusive access to these Strength Connection Mastery Seminars. It's a deep dive into the physical, mental, and spiritual training that you can begin using immediately. So do not wait, go now. Seriously, go. All right, much love to you. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.